Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 top tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Heidi Colthup is currently a lecturer in English language and linguistics at the University of Kent in the UK. But she was previously a magazine journalist, editor, farmer, artist, and even a primary school teacher. She lives in Wye in Kent and volunteers at the local community farm and is trying to get a literary festival started in the village, mainly so she can invite her favourite authors to come and give talks, which is as good a reason as any if you ask me. She currently lives with her partner Paul and her 2 elderly Bengal cats. I really enjoyed my conversation with Heidi because she gave me a different perspective to education around writing than many of my guests do, and that she does very much believe that an education around writing is absolutely key. Not necessarily needing to do a Master in Fine Arts or a Master's in Creative Writing, but to get some form of structured education or support. And I thought I was going to disagree with her about what she thinks about education and the need to get a qualification as such, but actually I found I agreed with her almost 100%, and so I hope that you'll benefit from listening to what she has to say, and perhaps she'll change your mind about it too. And crucially, we also talk about whether you're ever too old to go back and study and learn and get that education, whether it be in person through a degree or whether it be online through an online course of some description. So really interesting chat, lovely woman, very knowledgeable, and I know that you will get a lot out of this. So I will stop talking and let you listen. Lovely. Well, Heidi, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to learning more about you. And I wonder if we could start with just learning a little bit more how you got to where you are and how you became a writer, of course, but you've also taught writing as well. How did that come about for you?
Oh, wow. Partly necessity. And partly because it was something that I had always done. So, you know, I'd always written from, you know, being a small child. I used to keep a diary, and I used to write stories. And, you know, at school, English was always my favourite subject. And I have always been and continue to be a huge reader. So, you know, you name it, I've always got at least one novel on the go, but generally I tend to read 2 things at once. You know, I sort of listen to audiobooks and also read something physically. So yeah, that was sort of in the background. And then I went to university at sort of 18, when everybody does, and actually trained to be a primary school teacher. And did that for a few years, and then left teaching, sort of, because I got married and had twin boys. And when I married a farmer, and when my boys were very small, I went back. In fact, when the boys were 3 months old, I went back to university because I wanted to do a degree in fine art. I wanted to do something creative. Mm-hmm. And I did that. And throughout my degree, I didn't realise it at the time, but I was just concerned with story and how we tell stories and how they work in our culture and society. And that sort of led to lots of people, staff and fellow students alike, saying to me, oh, well, you are constantly talking about story. That's what all of your work is about. And you're always reading a novel. Why don't you write them? And I was sort of like, oh, no. Even though I had been part of a local writers group when I was in my teens. And it was sort of like, no, I don't do that. I don't do that. I'm a reader. And when I completed my fine art degree, I decided I wanted to do a master's because I just really, really enjoyed going back to studying, which I never thought I would have said. Because, I was somebody at school that hated homework. So I was going to go and do a master's in fine art, and I had that all sorted. And in fact, I was going to look at poetry and art, and I wanted to go to the Slade, and I'd sort of been in touch with people there, and it was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be an artist. And then I decided that maybe the best thing to do was to go and, everybody was telling me, you should write. So I thought, oh, well, I used to, why not? And I decided to do a master's in creative writing. And I've lived in Canterbury all my life. I've travelled a lot, but I've never lived anywhere else. And I wanted to go to Christchurch to do that because it was, at the time, I thought it was the only place that did a master's in creative writing that was sort of reasonably local. And at the time, they used to do their master's degrees 1 year on, 1 year off, because they did it all part-time. So it took 2 years, and they only had one cohort. So it was on the off year. And I thought, oh, that's great. I'll have to wait a year. And I'm not a very patient person. And I happened to have a look at the University of Kent website, and they said that they were going to start a master's in creative writing. I think it's been going 16, 17 years now. Mm-hmm. So I looked at the sort of the what they wanted for applications, and I thought, well, okay, so I, on the face of it, have the right qualifications, but I don't have a degree in English literature or English language. They're not going to, I won't even get a look in. So I did what I've always done. I contacted them and asked if it was possible to meet with somebody there and talk to them face to face, because I thought, if you do that, you're in with a much better chance because they get to know you. Mm-hmm. So I did that, went and met the course leader, and who was the poet Susan Wicks, who is lovely. And I chatted away to her, and she showed me the reading list. And fortunately, an awful lot of the reading list were books I'd actually read as part of my fine art degree. And I did my fine art degree in Canterbury as well. I did it at what used to be Kent Institute of Art and Design, but is now part of the University of the Creative Arts. And so I managed to sort of, she said, yes, I don't think you'll have any problems. It would be great to have you on this master's degree. Can you just send us something that you've written, or, something that you're working on at the moment? And I smiled and nodded and went home and wrote something because I didn't have anything at all. So sent it in, and they accepted me. And in that first cohort, I think they capped the numbers at something like 10. And we were told, I don't know how true it is, we were told that we'd all been handpicked. And in fact, it was a great selection of people. I started doing that. But as I say, I was married to a farmer, and I think I was about 3-4 weeks in, not much longer, and realised that the fees were going to be, I think I'd managed to sort of pay like the first month. And then it was like, I don't know how I'm going to afford this. And, farming as it is now wasn't in a great state. And we certainly weren't in a great state financially. So I thought, well, I'm doing something practical. I'm doing writing. I will get my writing to pay. And being a farming family, we had the Farmers Weekly delivered. So I had a look at that, and it's not all the price of beef and milk or tractors. In fact, they have a big section just about sort of farm life. And I thought, oh, right, okay, I could write for that. So I emailed the editor. And at the time, the editor was a woman. And I said, look, you don't have enough women writing for you. I'm a woman. I'm on a farm. And, I have driven tractors, not very well. And she emailed me back. I'd obviously I'd sent the email, right place, right time. Mm-hmm. And she responded and said, you're right. We don't have enough women. Can you write us something then? And, we'll see. So I wrote a piece. I can't even remember what it was about. But I wrote this as a non-fiction piece, magazine writing. And they liked it. They printed it in the farm life section. And the day that it went to press, I got a telephone call, and I was actually on my way to uni, for, my master's course. And the telephone call was from the editor saying, we really like this. Would you like to be one of our columnists? So it was sort of like, wow, I really wasn't expecting, because, that's the sort of thing that happens in books. You don't get a column with a national magazine after writing one piece. So, as I say, very much right place, right time.
I think what you've shown here in both examples is, going for the masters in writing, and then also going for the column is, if you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't put yourself out there and be open to, someone might say no, but equally, they might say yes.
Yeah. And I did that. I was a columnist then for them for 3 years. And it was, so I at the end of my master's, I had a telephone call or something. Anyway, a friend of mine who I'd known for years because we both have twins, and we'd met through a twins club in Canterbury. She had done her master's in creative writing, and she's a successful children's author now, Anne Booth. She contacted me and said, look, Christchurch are looking for somebody to teach their creative writing module on their English literature degree. And Anne is a far, far better, far nicer person than I am, because Anne said that they wanted somebody who would also be able to teach poetry. And Anne's master's hadn't included poetry, and she isn't a poet, whereas mine had included it. And I think by that point I'd had some poetry published. It's terrible poetry, but I'd had some published, so I had a bit of an idea about it. So I contacted Christchurch and said, just finished my master's, blah blah blah. And obviously I had a list of publications because I'd been writing for the Farmers Weekly, and, I got the poetry published, and they took me on.
Fabulous.
And so I think that first year I just taught, so it was like, as is so much in academia, like a 0 hours contract. So I just went and taught literally 2 hours a week of creative writing to final year English literature students. And then the next year they asked me to teach some English lit, introduction to poetry. And it just sort of snowballed from there. And then a few years in, they decided they wanted to start a creative and professional writing degree. And that I think has now been going for must be about 10 years, something like that. And I actually left Christchurch to move to Kent, where I am now. I left about 4 years ago. So I had a few years where I was teaching both at Christchurch and at Kent. And it was a lot to juggle. So when I got offered a permanent post, not full-time still, but, at least part-time permanent here at Kent, I made the leap. So
fabulous. Wow, it just shows, I don't know how you feel about these things, but I'm a big believer in that the universe will kind of come when you need it to, and it feels like you've sort of been open to anything and everything that would come your way, and one positive thing has led to another, and brought you here. But I did want to just go back to something that you said earlier on about people had said to you when you were doing your fine art degree, you love stories, everything you do is about story, why don't you write? And your first instinct was, no, even though you'd been writing for many, many years. What do you think it was at that time that made you kind of recoil from that and say, nope, can't do it?
I think probably in part because doing a fine art degree, I had become really aware of creative practice and how certainly in any form of creative practice, but particularly that involves words and images, but not being a musician is a creative practice, but I don't know that it's quite as revealing. So that's the thing when you are writing, but also when you're creating an artwork, you can't but help put yourself on the page. And I learned through my fine art degree how to be aware of that. And certainly sort of in like early drafts, if you like, of pieces. So whether they were short films or I used to make installations and short films, I became aware of the bits of me that I was putting on display and learned how to sort of live with it or to actually draw back from it. And when you're writing, particularly when you start writing, you haven't always learned that. And so that means that you can end up being incredibly revealing about yourself. And so I'd realized that the penny had dropped with me, and I just thought, no, I don't want to share all of this with you, even though, as I say, I kept a diary. And I did share everything, still do pretty much, on the page there. But I hadn't really learned at that point how to translate it into writing. And as I say, I had just about managed to navigate and negotiate how to put a piece of artwork out there without everybody saying, oh, we can see.
It's so true what you say. You even unconsciously, I can only speak for writing. I'm not an artist at all, but we're unconsciously putting bits of ourselves. It's not wholly autobiographical, but there's definitely bits and the inner bits of ourselves on the page. And I work with new writers, and they're often very, very surprised when we get sort of, say, 3/4 of the way towards the end of the novel, and they have this realization that, oh, this book's actually about me and my life and my relationship with my family, having thought they were just creating something out of nothing and a big fictional piece. But it's not. And so it's quite a shock to them. And I see it as well. People do exactly what you did, but I don't think they're as aware of it. Oh, no, I want to step back, and they want to then protect the characters that they're writing, because it feels like they're protecting themselves as well. So so thank you for sharing that, because I think that is so an important part of the practice of writing and creating as we go along.
Yeah.
So thank you. So you've told us about your own experiences with doing a master's in fine art, then doing your master's in creative writing. You've taught for many, many years now as well. And so you obviously feel that getting a writing education is important and valuable. but not everybody feels that way. And sort of famously, I think it's Hanif Qureshi who said, "Oh, that's a waste of time. You don't need to do that." I wonder how you feel about that, and how you might respond to him if he was to say that to you.
Well, I think there's an awful lot sort of tied up with that. So it used to be the case that new writers, if they came up with a great idea, they would be able to send it to an agent or to a publisher, and publishers in particular had more money and had time to be able to develop a writer and would be able to invest that. And that's no longer the world that we live in. So that means that you need to, as a writer, you still need to be developed. You still need to have that talent nurtured. So a lot of the time, particularly master's courses, that's where you can get that support, that development, and really sort of make your way successfully along the road, particularly for novelists. So there's that. There is simply that the market has changed, and the world has changed. And then, I mean, in some respects, I agree with him, in as much as you can teach people the skills. You can teach people how to have better grammar, how to put together a story more effectively, how to tell a story in lots of different ways. And actually as well, how to talk about story and plot and narrative, all of that technical stuff. You can teach all of that. You cannot teach the creativity part. You can help people to nurture it, but ultimately, and I know it's something that's said an awful lot of the time, oh, everybody's got a novel in them. They haven't. Or if they have, it's a bad novel. There's an awful lot of stuff out there now, and self-publishing has become really popular, and I think that that's a great thing. But it means that there are a huge number of people out there who are working incredibly hard for virtually nothing, and they are not getting the support or the development that would turn them into being, what they perhaps currently are, which is a reasonable writer, but to turn them into a great writer. And that's where I think education, because we don't have the same sort of nurturing publishing system that maybe we never really did have, but certainly there was a perception that that's what would happen. The only people that now seem to get nurtured as writers by publishers are celebrities. So, and that's not to say that, there aren't any good celebrity writers. There are. But by and large, those celebrity writers that end up with great big contracts for writing, yet another, I don't want to say cozy crime, because that really points to who I'm talking about, but I'm not, these people can write, but they're people who already had a reputation as a writer. But for writing in a different, format, whether it was comedy or whatever. And so they already know how to communicate really, really well. Yeah. And then there are other people who have simply been celebrities, and they get stuff ghostwritten for them. Or I do remember reading about one particular celebrity who used to present a very popular television show. And she was, I think she was tweeting about how she had her editor coming in to see her again this week, and how her editor used to come out to her house once a month or so on, and they would sit down at the kitchen table and they would work together on her novel. And I read that, and I was spitting nails, because how many new writers would really, really benefit from that same sort of, nurturing? But of course, the new writer's name on the front cover of a novel is not going to sell copies, whereas the TV celebrity is.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It comes back often to that lack of money, and so if they can already know someone's got an audience that they can tap into, it just makes it an easier shoe in. And I wonder then, I just thought about this now, but I wonder if having those celebrities then give the publishers a little bit more leeway a little bit more funds to then be able to go and work with newer writers. What do you think about that?
I think that would be lovely if that happened. And it's maybe how it should happen. But, I think now for a lot of writers starting out, even those that manage to get themselves a good contract with, a well-known publishing house, so many of them will be perhaps tied into maybe a 2-book or a 3-book deal, and they've put out 1 book and then they get dropped, or they put out 2 books and get dropped. And, that's something that the reality of that, and, I know quite a few people that has happened to. That is, in some respects, even more soul destroying, because, you think, I've made it. I've got a deal, a publication deal, and, and I'm tied in, and I've got all of £8,000 to write 3 novels or whatever. And it is a tiny amount like that for giving up, each novel. Most writers end up giving up a couple of years of their lives.
Yeah. And a good portion of any income that comes in from it as well. Yeah. So do you think then, given that, so the indie space has grown a lot, the majority of indie writers will not do a degree, but maybe do some online courses, will do online training. Do you think there's space for both, or do you think that the indie space still has, in terms of education particularly, has a way to go, or can you see that it's doing a good job? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that sort of general democratization of having indie spaces is brilliant, because, as I say, there are just fewer and fewer opportunities for writers anyway nowadays. So I think that is great. I don't know. I mean, I've got friends who publish successfully as indie writers, and they have qualifications, and have done master's degrees and stuff like that. So yeah, there are people out there who have actually made a conscious decision not to go with a big name publisher, because they realise that there are pitfalls, and and even if you do get a good deal, as I say, you don't actually get to see much money. But I mean, nobody does it for the money. But I don't know. I think that. Yeah, I think getting some sort of support at least, even if it's not a sort of a full-blown sort of, I don't know that you necessarily need to have a qualification to write. I think that there are always places and people that you can get the support that you need, whether you pay or not. And there are lots and lots of extremely good writers around who also happen to be teachers. And I think, there are also an awful lot of podcasts and, YouTube videos and stuff like that can be really, really useful. But I think that probably, one of the main reasons that I decided to definitely go and do a creative writing master's was because I thought, I wanted to keep up creative practice. And I wanted to have that support that I used to have from a writers group. And when I was in a writers group, when I was in my teens, the main reason I'd left was because I was writing short stories that I was trying out new things, but I also recognised that they weren't terribly good. And I just remember having an awful lot of feedback from people in the group that was not terribly constructive. I don't mean it was negative. It was actually them sort of stroking my ego, which is lovely. We all need that.
Yes.
But I don't know, maybe it was because I was sort of, like a teenager, and they were mainly older people, and maybe they just, oh no, this is great. We want some, new blood. But I just ended up not respecting their opinion, because I thought, well, what, you're telling me that this poem is great. It's a rip-off of a Maya Angelou poem. It's rubbish. Well, Maya Angelou's isn't, but mine is. Why are you telling me it's so amazing? It's rubbish. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and that's the problem with if you're an indie writer and you show particularly friends and family, they, of course, will give you great feedback because they love you. Mm-hmm. And, they don't want to say, this is rubbish, and also most people, even people who are really widely read, they don't necessarily have the language or the knowledge of, okay, I know there's something wrong with this, but I don't know why it's gone wrong or where it's gone wrong. And I think that that's something that either other writers, more experienced writers, or doing some sort of course, regardless of whether it has a qualification or not. But, it's that thing of somebody who actually knows, who is some form of expert. Mm-hmm. If they can then say to you, okay, the reason this isn't working is because, you're telling the whole of the story in that first paragraph because you're telling it to you. The reader doesn't need that. That needs to be, 8 paragraphs down the way, or, 3 chapters in. It's that sort of stuff that you might know there's something wrong, but you don't know how to fix it. And that's something that you can get from somebody more experienced.
Yes, I 100% agree with that is. And I think the key word that's come out for me in what you were saying there is it's support. Mm. So not necessarily a formal qualification and going to do that, but making sure that you've got the support of a person or a course that can help you make that next step, make that next leap in your craft, in your writing practice. So, really interesting stuff there. Because a lot of my audience, they are a bit older now and are now reached a time in life where they're either thinking about it or they are ready to step in and start writing. But I hear again and again from many, many people that they feel that they've left it too late. They're too old to go back to school or go back to learning. And this really saddens me, but from a lot of people I do hear as well that there will have been that teacher in primary school who just said the wrong thing at the wrong time, or has told them quite blatantly, you've got no talent, you'll never make it. And even people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s have said to me, I still remember that day. Would you have any sort of words of encouragement or advice for someone who might be thinking about it but feeling nervous that they're either too old or that they don't have what it takes?
Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely... I recognise the thing of the teacher. When I was in primary school, I had a teacher who shall remain nameless, who, as I say, I used to love writing stories, and one afternoon a week we would all, or in the morning, one day a week in the morning we would all write stories and essays or composition, I think they might have been called, but anyway, stories. And then we would hand our books in, and after lunch, after we came in from lunchtime play, the teacher would have the stack of them sitting on her desk, and the one on top or 2 on top would be the ones that she would read to the whole class. And I remember vividly coming in, so I would have been, I think I was 9 or 10, walking into the classroom and seeing that my story was on top. And it was like, yes, I made it. Finally, I'm going to have, and it was a story, I even remember the story now, it was about a mermaid. And this mermaid who was incredibly old. And, and I loved fairy tales as a kid. And, as I say, read everything I could lay my hands on. And I'm also left-handed. And I was the last person in that class to be allowed to move from pencils to fountain pens. Everyone else was moved. And because my handwriting looked like a spider had crawled across the page, it's better now, but I wasn't allowed. And, back then you couldn't, I don't know that you could get left-handed pens or anything like that. And they were proper old-fashioned fountain pens. So, my writing was a mess. I wasn't great at spelling. And whenever I made a mistake, I would do what the teacher from the previous class had told us to do, which was just cross it out. But this new teacher wanted us to leave it and put brackets around it. And I would keep forgetting because I was so busy about, I want to get this story down. I would make a spelling mistake, realise I got it wrong, scratch it out, and then put brackets around it and then move on. And this was in ink because I had just moved over. And my book was not perhaps the neatest. Anyway, she held the book up to the whole class and then passed it round and said, look at this disgusting piece of work. Yeah, and even now I'm just thinking, oh, how awful.
It is awful.
How awful to do that. That's why I became a primary school teacher. And I didn't realise that. Years later, I was having a chat with somebody and it was like, oh, that's why I realised I had that insight at the age of 9 or 10 that this woman was doing such a terrible job that I could do a better job. And that's me all over. Whenever I sort of come across anything and I think, well, that's not very good, I could do much better.
Oh.
And that's, I probably got myself into too many things because of that.
Gosh, that is horrible though. My children are still in primary school and thankfully in our school at least things have moved on slightly and my son's handwriting is awful, but as far as I know it's never been paraded around the school. And even that idea of you're allowed to move up to a fountain pen or to ink when you reach a certain standard, doesn't matter the creativity behind it or the emotion or the thought that's gone in it, as long as on the page it is presented neatly. My heart goes out to you. Yourself.
So I don't think that there are an awful lot of, fewer around now, but there were an awful lot of teachers around in the past who were not good people. That's one thing. So I do completely understand when people say, that one teacher, they were talking rubbish because although not everybody does have a novel in them, that doesn't mean that everybody doesn't have a story in them. And that story may not be a piece of fiction. It may be their life story. And everybody has something that is, particular to them and about them. And I think that we sort of, as we're all getting older, we owe it to future generations to actually get some of those stories down, because there are things that I think, particularly now that, we're living in a digital age. So in my lecture this morning, I was teaching the language of media and looking at what is media and how does language work in it. And I was showing my students an image, screenshot of Amazon, their website in, I think it was 1995, and it's all grey and it looks awful. And I showed this to them and I said, I do realise that this is an older website than most of you. And I still find that a bit mind-blowing. I mean, these students are, in their early 20s, but it's like, how is that possible? That they have grown up with this, so they don't know a time that was entirely analog, and there are so many different things that you sort of you realise. I don't think twice about using a landline telephone with a rotary dial or whatever it is. Things that we take for granted because we grew up with them, or understanding when an older person talks about the wireless, they're not talking about the Wi-Fi, so it's stuff like that. And so I think certainly for older people, if nothing else, if they write down all of the stories that they remember from their childhood and the stories that they heard in their childhood, the family stories and, the sort of the local myths, and legends and stuff like that. Those are really, really important. And they also shouldn't be worried about, am I getting the spelling right? Is the grammar correct? And so on, because language constantly changes. And the way that we talk now is not the way that people talked 50 years ago or 100 years ago. We don't all talk like Shakespeare. So I think it's really important for people to write absolutely in their own voice, spelling mistakes, even though they're not necessarily mistakes, but, you know, spelling differences and different grammar and so on. Absolutely, people should write in that, because languages are disappearing. And, you know, even in the UK, there are so many different languages that people grew up with that unless they sort of keep them alive, they're just going to go. And that's terrible and really sad. So yes, people should write, if not for themselves, although that's a really great reason to write because it's good for mental health and so on, then write for your kids or your friends' kids, or, you know, all of the people coming after you.
Wonderful words of encouragement there, and I 100% agree with everything that you said, particularly about life stories and how it made me laugh out loud though at the idea of the wireless is not a wireless internet connection. It's such a great example of the difference. It's fabulous. So I hope any of our listeners will be encouraged by that and know that you can have a negative experience at school, but that doesn't mean the teacher was right. It doesn't mean they were right. And clearly it's not stopped you from doing your own writing and helping others to write, because you also have an online magazine for short stories. And I wonder if you'd share a little bit about that, who can submit to you if they can, and where people can find it.
So it's called Short Reads. It's very new. It's found on medium.com, and Medium was started by the same people who started Twitter. But whereas with Twitter, when it started, you were only allowed 140 characters, it's now 280. But it's obviously very short. Medium is the antidote to that. There isn't a word count limit. And it's been described as being like YouTube for writers. And it's mainly, there are some fiction publications on there, but they tend to be short stories. It's not a place really for novelists. You know, novelists are much better off going to places like Wattpad, and, you know, Archive of Our Own and stuff like that. They're writing fan fiction. So it is very much aimed at more media-ish. So it's a bit like blogging, but as I say, I've started a publication on there called Short Reads, and anybody can submit to it. But what you need to do is, first of all, you need to join Medium, and that's no different from, you know, signing up to, well, you can sign up with Facebook or Twitter or an email address. So any of the normal sort of ways that you would for any social media. Once you've done that, you need to contact me, and the email address for it, it's all on the Short Reads Medium page, but I think it's shortreadsmagazine@gmail.com. And if they send me their Medium username, then I can add them as a writer to it. And when we started, we were putting out a few short stories every 2 weeks, but partly because term has started and I'm up to my eyes in it, and also because I think we're going to start to have probably quite a lot of students writing for us, as I sort of put the word out here a bit more. We're going to just once a month. And if we end up, you know, the need to move to, I don't know, to more issues, go back to every other week, I don't know, we'll see. But as I say, it's very much early days at the moment. So some of the writers on there are very sort of experienced fiction writers. An awful lot of people that are writing for it aren't, and that's absolutely okay, because whenever anything gets submitted, it doesn't just get instantly published. Instead, I read it and edit it. And so, you know, if something comes in that is perhaps not, I used to be a fiction editor, again, when I was doing my master's, I think, or maybe just after. So I used to, it was for an international literary journal, which sounds very grand. It wasn't. But I used to get, I don't know, about 100 odd or more short stories come in once a month. And, whenever we had something that just wasn't really our genre at all, I remember an elderly man used to send in some very interesting pieces of erotica every month. And just sort of saying, thank you, not really our place.
You've got to do your research, yes.
Yeah. So always, whenever you're submitting to any publication, do your research, find out what sort of stuff they print. The same as with publishers or agents. Find out, do they actually represent people like you or write the stuff that you do? If somebody sends in something that is really wide of the mark, I will sort of, respond and say, maybe it's not for us, or, it maybe needs a bit more work. If it's just sort of typos, and, at least one of our writers is somebody who has an amazing approach to spelling, because he's very, very dyslexic and his spellings are fabulous. You can always make out what they are, but they are brilliant. Somebody like that, I will actually, where appropriate, I will sort of do a bit of light editing, but ultimately it's down to the writer and what they want to communicate. So sometimes non-standard spelling, and we have got novels and short stories that don't have any punctuation. They're hard to read, but they do exist. So, it's sort of a very light touch, but essentially anything that is, as I say, short fiction-ish. And when I say ish, that means that it doesn't necessarily have to be entirely fictional, because nobody's going to come around your house and say, this didn't really happen. Well, they might put it online, this didn't happen, or they might say, oh, that wasn't exactly as I remember it, or whatever. But ultimately, we all make up stories about our lives anyway. So if it's a life story, that's fine. But as I say, short fiction, so anything really, from maybe a piece of flash fiction, and shortest flash fiction is 6 words, all the way up to Medium recommends, I think about 1,500 words or so it takes about 3 minutes to read. So anything up to about maybe 4,000 words. Okay. Because, people want to be able to read something in a coffee break or in their lunch break or whatever. So something short.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll definitely link to Short Reads magazine, so if anyone's interested, they can go and check that out. And so, do you also write for it? Do you have space in your week to do your own fiction or creative non-fiction writing?
Yeah. So I have got some pieces on Short Reads and various other different places in different publications on Medium, and some pieces are more sort of journalistic, but I do write fiction, and sort of as part of my research as an academic, I'm very interested in that space between the online world and the real world. And we're all quite familiar with having stories appearing in the online world. We're used to seeing things on screens. And I'm really interested in how we can do the reverse and bring the online world into our everyday world. So I did a project during lockdown where I'd written half a dozen stories that were about the village where I live. That completely fictional, made up character, the lot, but they were absolutely inspired by various places in the village. And I put them onto Pebbles, not the whole story. They were online, and then I used QR codes and printed them onto stickers and stuck them onto these stones and put them around the village. And in the hope that people would pick up the stone, see the QR code and go, oh, what's that? Have a look. What happened was all the stones got stolen.
That's random, isn't it? I wonder why they stole them.
But I'm trying to. That was sort of like a pilot study. I'm doing the same sort of thing again, but here actually on campus at the University of Kent. But I don't want it just to be my stories. I want it to be stories that are inspired by the campus, and they can be life stories and so on. So I have all of that. Yeah. I also write. I've gone back to writing literary fiction. And so I've got a piece that I'm waiting to hear that I submitted back in August to an academic literary journal, and I actually checked on it this morning, and it's apparently still with one of the editors. It hasn't been sent out for review yet. Okay. So I'm sort of doing that as well, going back.
My fingers are crossed for you. Yeah. Well, it's mate, you've got so much on, but it's wonderful to hear that you still managed to find space for your own writing as well. That's fabulous. My goodness, the hour has gone so quickly. Heidi, it's been lovely talking with you. I've really enjoyed it. I found it very educational, as it would be. You are an educator, and I can't wait to put this episode out. So thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you for asking me.
If you're a first-time novelist who is struggling to either finish your novel or get those revisions to where you want them to be, then I've got just the thing for you. I have a small group coaching program which runs over 12 months, and over the course of that program I will help you fix those plot problems that you've been struggling with. I'll help you get under the surface of your characters so you really get to know them and what's driving them. And crucially for you, I give you that self-belief that you need to get you through the roller coaster that is writing a novel, so that you can carry on, get to the end, and get your book, your story out into the world so it can change people's lives. If that sounds good to you, if that is something that you'd be interested in doing, I know I can help you get to where you want to be. So book a call with me. Let's have a chat and see if we are a good fit for each other. If you're interested in doing that, then go to emmadesi.com/story builder. I look forward to chatting. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.